Hello and welcome to the first episode of MMA Crypt Fighting Talk. For today's show, we're going 3 rounds of recent hot MMA topics, featuring Dan Henderson vs Vitor Belfort 2, Shogun Rua to middleweight, and finally Cro Cop losing Russia. Okay, joining me today to debate these topics is MMA Crypt Brian Hunt and Greg Marshall. First off, welcome to the show, Brian.
Oh, thank you. Welcome, guys, and hope you guys are enjoying your day.
Yeah. Greg, how are you today?
Yeah, great. It's freezing up here in Scotland, so you guys are lucky.
Alright guys, we'll start things out in round 1, discussing Henderson vs Belfort 2. The pair met previously back in October 2006, where Henderson grappled his way to a decision victory. Now, coming into this fight, Belfort was the favourite, and rightly so, having been on stunning form recently, and has looked like a completely different fighter on his return to the UFC. What do you think has been a difference in Belfort recently? Let's kick things off with you first, Greg.
Well, a couple of things, I think. Obviously, TRT's got to have an issue on it. It's helping him train harder, obviously. And secondly, Black Zillions seem to be doing him a world of good with his striking. Henry Hooft seems to be working wonders there.
Okay, what about you, Brian?
I actually saw the change before UFC. It was this fight against Matt Lindland. That was, for me, the invention of a patient Vitor Belfort. He wasn't looking for his 90-second explosion and then pray for the next round if he would win it or not. He became a patient fighter against Matt Lindland and used his patience to explode. Maybe he still only got 90 seconds of fight in him. I don't think so, but that could be the case. But now he's spacing it out. He might use 10 seconds of fight here, 20 seconds of fight there. But he's patient. He's matured. He's patient, and it's a much better Vitor Belfort.
Yeah, for sure. I put it down to maturity, personally. I think Belfort used to crumble when a fight wasn't going his way. I'm going to use the Anthony Rumble Johnson fight as a perfect example. You know, he stayed in that fight and managed to get the win. Also, I'm with Greg too. I think the Black Zillions, you know, he seems more focused and happier since moving there. So, those two things for me. Okay, moving on to the fight itself. It was a short affair with Belfort getting the KO early in round 1. What did you make of the fight itself, guys? Did it go the way you expected? That's for you first, Greg.
Yeah, well, I predicted a first round knockout for Vitor in the prediction contest. I just think Dan's slow and clumsy now, and it was set up for Belfort to land a knockout blow. Thought it was always going to go that way, even though Dan had never been knocked out before. Thought it was always going to be the first time he was going to get that.
And you, Brian?
No, not at all. I thought it would be a decision. For what Greg said, Hendo doesn't get knocked out. He hasn't been knocked out. He's been against some good guys. I thought it'd be a little bit more cautious fight, more patient fight, and I was wrong. I'm not shocked by it, because Vitor could knock out anybody very quickly, but that's not what I was expecting. But again, not shocked, but yeah, I was thinking a 5-round war on this fight.
Well, it sort of went the way I thought it would, and most of the people at MMA Crypt who entered the prediction contest, it was all predicting a Belfort knockout. Hendo came in, wading in with those Hendo bombs, and Belfort, he stayed perfectly calm, and he timed the uppercut perfectly. The thing that surprised me was just how slow Henderson was. Greg just mentioned it. He's looked really slow in his last few fights, you know. Hendo used to be scrappy, but fast. You know, against Machida, Evans, and now Belfort, he's looked really, really slow. Would you agree with that, guys?
Absolutely. That's exactly the reason I thought Vitor would get the knockout, even though, like you say, Henderson's never been knocked out.
You agree with that, Brian?
Yes, I would. I don't know how much he's slowed down as far as actual speed, or how much more one-dimensional he's become. He used to be a two-dimensional fighter with his cage grappling and the power. Now he's just power. He's always looking for that big right. That's it, big right. And if he doesn't land it, he's kind of hurt. But he usually lands it, makes an interesting fight out of it. So exactly. Slow, yes. One dimension, absolutely.
Exactly, I totally agree. Well, that's 3 straight losses now for Henderson. Where does he go from here? Do you think the UFC cut him? What do you think, guys? Start with you, Greg.
For me, I think he should retire, but I think he's lost 3 in a row. Like we've said already, I think he looks like he's got less there now. He's reliant on the overhand right, less of a tank in him. I think it's time for him to give it up, but I don't think he'll be cut, and I think he'll re-sign.
What do you think, Brian? Do you agree with Greg?
No, I do not, Greg. It's a loss to Vitor, who we think is in the title shot now, and then he has, I think, 2 split decision losses against Evans and Machida, whom are also no bombs. So no, I think what they should do is schedule a fight with him with Little Nog, and then the next day when Little Nog pulls out of that fight due to injury, they schedule a fight with Thiago Silva. I'd like to see Hendo versus Thiago Silva, to be honest, and I'd be good with that.
Well, I'm going to go with yes. I think the UFC should cut him. He hasn't looked the same, and with the age factor, I just don't see him build himself back up. I really do think that the John Jones fight, where it got cancelled, I think that just took the wind out of his sails. He really hasn't looked the same ever since then. Okay, that's all for round 1. Let's move on to round 2 now. Now, an interesting story broke a couple of days ago. Shogun Rua revealed he was flirting with the idea of dropping to middleweight. Do you think it's a good move for Shogun to drop to middleweight? And do you think he can make the cut? Let's start with you first, Brian.
Yes, it's clearly a good move. He's always been a soft light heavyweight, but it's all about if he becomes a professional fighter. I don't consider Rua a modern heavyweight professional fighter. He uses camp to get into shape, and if you do that, no, he's not going to have any more success at middleweight as he did in light heavyweight. He's just not a professional. If you go into a camp in shape, then you use that camp to finite your skills and cut weight. But trying to do both of cutting weight and getting in shape, you get slow and sloppy, and that's what we have as Shogun Rua now. It doesn't matter what class he fights in.
I love the idea, really. I think it's a fresh start for him. I feel his morale, it's been dropping a little bit. I believe that's been Shogun's problem throughout his career. When he came over to the UFC, people blamed his knee injuries. I believed it was morale, mainly. I think he went through a hard time mentally. And I believe an in-shape, mentally focused Shogun Rua is very dangerous. We saw what he did to Machida. He beat Machida twice. Well, technically once, but if you watch the fight, a lot of people agree that he defeated Machida twice at the top of his game. What do you think, Greg?
For me, I think it's a maybe. But you'd hope it would give him a new drive, something to aim for again. But I'm not convinced. Since he's came to the UFC, he's lost, 6 out of 11 fights? And the fights he's won have been Brandon Vera, Forrest Griffin, Mark Coleman, Chuck Liddell when he was done. I'm not convinced he's going to be any different at that weight than any other weight. I think he's, like Brian said, he's a fighter from days gone by. Doesn't fight clever anymore.
Okay, if Shogun was to drop down to middleweight, in terms of rankings, where would you place him? Let's start with you first, Brian.
I'd have to still put him in the probably bottom half of the top 10, somewhere 6, 7, 8. I'd say behind a Bisping type of fighter, but yet maybe ahead of a Munoz. So somewhere in the bottom half of the top 10 is where I'd have to start.
Yeah, I'd have to put him in the top 10 for sure. Also, you got guys like Francis Carmont, Tim Kennedy, Costa Philippou. Those guys have been playing the trader. They've been doing really well, but Shogun, in terms of history and his skill set, you've got to put him in the top 10 above those guys. I would place him about 7 or 8. Where would you place him, Greg?
Probably the same as you guys, lower end of the top 10. Although, again, granted with the results he's had, he probably doesn't really deserve to be there. He's getting placed there more on name than merit. I think a Mark Munoz would beat him. I think a Luke Rockhold would beat him. A Tim Kennedy would beat him. So I think he'd be getting placed there on name rather than merit.
I sort of tend to agree with Greg too. Okay, Shogun faces off against James Tahuna at light heavyweight this coming December at UFC Fight Night 33. What do you think happens if he loses this fight, guys? That would be 3 straight losses in a row. Do you think the UFC would chop him before he could actually even make a move to 185? Let's start with you first, Bri.
No. To be fair, Tahuna would be his first bad loss. Losing to Sonnen, Gustafsson, Hendo, and Bones, those aren't bad losses in the UFC. And when that becomes a bad loss, then the UFC has really evolved to a much higher level. So no, it'd be for his first bad loss in his last 6 or 7 fights. So at light heavyweight, do you keep him around? No, that might be more of a numbers game. Is he worth the amount of numbers the UFC's paying him to stay there? So I would definitely give him the go-ahead to go to middleweight. And I'd be excited to see him at middleweight because the fighters you mentioned before, Kennedy. That's a good fight. I like that fight. I have no problem seeing that fight.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there, Brian. I think all his losses came against top level competition. Greg, what's your take on it?
He won't lose, so I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think he'll beat Tuhuna. Simple as that. I think he'll beat Tuhuna. So I don't think it's going to even come to the point where it's going to be an issue.
Okay, let's move on to round 3. A guy who's sort of fallen off the MMA radar in recent years. He is Mirko Cro Cop. Mirko lost this past Friday at Legends 2 event in Russia via neck crank. He faced off against Alexei Olyanek. He's a seasoned veteran, but never really made it to the big time. He's fought for Bellator once or twice. First off, guys, is this a shock result in your books, or no real surprise? Starting with you first, Greg.
A shock? No. Just obviously, Olyanek came in as a last-minute replacement for Alex Emelianenko. I think he was brought in to lose, but looking at his record, he's beaten guys like Dion Staring, who gave Daniel Cormier a tough battle recently, and Jeff Monson. So the guy has a bit of form, and Cro Cop's not looked like an MMA fighter for 5 years, in my eyes.
To be fair, I did expect Mirko to play the victory here. I felt like losses against Roy Nelson, Frank Mir, Brennan Schwab. I felt like he had tough fights in the UFC. Obviously, when he got mediocre opponents, like just outside top 10, he finished them fairly convincing, showing that he's still, a danger. Also, his recent K1 Grand Prix win. I was really expecting Cro Cop to shine in this bout, mainly for morale purposes too. What do you think, Brian?
Shock? No, not in the slightest. His last quality win was 2010 against Pat Barry, and I think I'm using quality very loosely. That's his best win as of late. That's not a very good win. He shouldn't even have won that fight. So, no, not a shock at all. It's sad to see Cro Cop going that way, but I think Greg saying 6 years is being nice even. I think we need to start talking maybe 7 years when we start thinking of any kind of Cro Cop of value in MMA.
Yeah, we spoke before the recording, Brian, about the Pat Barry fight. We both agreed that Pat Barry showed Cro Cop too much respect and sort of let him off the hook in a way. Would you agree with that too, Greg?
Yeah, definitely. Pat Barry definitely gave him too much respect in that fight. I think if Barry had went out and attacked him, he'd have won that fight easily.
Now, there was a lot of talk, even from Mirko Cro Cop himself, that he should have retired after he won the Pride 2006 openweight tournament. Do you think he should have hung up the gloves there, Brian?
Yeah, I mean he's 7-7-1 since beating Barnett in 2006, and what's the best win since that is Pat Barry. Come on, Pat Barry's not even a legitimate heavyweight, and no, yeah, sure, get rid of him, but they're gonna be like, oh, Cro Cop would have dominated in the UFC. Well, no, we got that debate over with, and now he would not, will not, and never was a top 3 UFC fighter heavyweight.
Yeah, you see, that's why I like that he carried on, you see, because we had all these questions with Fedor. How would Fedor fare in the UFC? Would he destroy people? I feel like if Cro Cop never came over, people would have been saying, oh, Cro Cop would have smashed Tim Sylvia, he would have done this, would have done that. But we actually got to find out, and it wasn't the case at all. What do you think, Greg?
Yeah, since he retired when he left the UFC, he's had 2 fights. Obviously, the one the other day there, and he had another one against a guy who'd never even fought an MMA fight before, a sumo wrestler, who he beat surprisingly. He should have jacked it in and left it at that when he left the UFC. Obviously, he took that fight at Legend the other day because the money must have been fantastic. If you look at the names that were on the card, they must have been paying some big money.
Okay, now Mirko, he's won all of his 6 K1 fights in the past year and a half. Do you see Mirko ended his career in K1, or do you still think he has more to offer in MMA? Let's start with you first, Greg.
I think he should stop MMA because he's just wasting his time. But the fact is, if companies like Legend are willing to pay him crazy money, which they must be, he'll keep going. But he should stick to K1 or something if he's going to carry on.
Ryan?
No, I would agree. There's no reason for him not to stay with K1 if he's enjoying the combat, enjoying the training. Absolutely stay with K1. But MMA, he's hurting the shadow of a legacy he has left in the sport, and that's Again, I think I'm being kind using Legacy and Cro Cop in the same sentence right now.
Yeah, I sort of want to see him stick to K1. You know, if you look outside the UFC at the state of the heavyweight division, there's not much out there for him. You know, he can have some fun fights, but nothing that will do anything for him. You know, something that he hasn't already achieved anyway. So to me, he's just putting himself on the line and destroying a legacy, like you mentioned. Okay, guys, that's a wrap for today's show. Be sure to check out MMACrypt.com and keep an eye out for future episodes of MMA Crypt's Fighting Talk. Until next time, guys, take care.